And now we talk about the requirements to be
No
one.
person shall be a representative who shall not have attained the age of 25 years and been 7 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state in which he shall be chosen. And of course it says he because it's 1789 and women are just not going to hold this office, so it doesn't matter. But this is until we get to the Supreme Court, this is the most lax requirements of any federal office. You have to be 25. My firstborn child is old enough and has been for a few years now to be a representative. You have to be a citizen for 7 years, which means I have an aunt who only became a citizen the first time Trump became president. She'd been in the country for many, many years and became a citizen then because, seems safer. She's from Peru. But she has now been a citizen long enough to be a representative, and you have to be an inhabitant of the state when you're running for, when you run for it. So if I moved to, Idaho just before, which I'm not going to do, but if I moved to Idaho just before the election, I could be a representative from Idaho because them's the rules. Probably won't win because people do tend to look down on you when you do that. The term carpetbagging is fraught with history, but it is still used for people who move into a district just to run for office there. But technically you can do it. There is no residency requirement other than you need to live there when you run. It's a really lax set of requirements.
Yeah, I heard. I don't know we talk about I think we talk about the next article, but technically, you didn't have to be the part of the district you're running for.
No, you have to be in the state. Again, generally speaking, it's harder to get elected if you don't live in the district because people will point that out. But technically speaking, I could, from my house in Western Washington, run to be a representative of the people of Spokane on the other side of the state and theoretically serve in that office. Not going to happen for a whole bunch of reasons, but it theoretically could. I suspect it's a lot more likely in the smaller states. I don't know how many representatives Rhode Island has off the top of my head, but I suspect it's a lot easier to live in one district and represent another in Rhode Island than it is in us big old western states.
It's really easy in the states that only have one.
Yeah, well, Wyoming, you live in Wyoming and you're done. But, very small, like New Hampshire, Vermont, the very small eastern states, I suspect it's a lot easier to say, well, okay, but, especially if they've recently redrawn districting lines. It's a lot easier to represent a district you don't technically live in. But in any state pretty much west of the Mississippi, it's not going to play. Yeah. Unless, again, they've recently redrawn your districting lines. And even here, when they've done that, it's generally been people from the area they live in. And you just run in a new district.
So do you think 25 years is a good age to be, or you think it should be, or should be younger?
Oh, I do not think it should be younger. No. I think you need to have spent a few elections voting before you can run for office. I think that is a perfectly reasonable requirement. 25, it's not true that people didn't live as long in those days. The average life expectancy was younger, but that is almost exclusively because of infant and child mortality. That's not nobody lived to be 70, it's a whole lot of people didn't live to be 5. That's, let's be real clear that that's what's going on as far as life expectancy in 1789. A lot of women, died in childbirth, which is going to be making a comeback, kids. But broadly speaking, once you live to be 40, you are going to live just as long as a person living today, barring accident, infection, or, epidemic disease, which will also be making a comeback if RFK Jr. gets in health.
Yeah, of course. Back then, women had not only thinking because they had a lot more babies because your baby was more likely to die. Even
they had
recently,
a lot more babies because babies were more likely to die. They had a lot more babies because of less reliable birth control. Let's be very, very clear. Women did not always carry their children to term. If you read a lot of period stuff, there's a lot of information about how not to have a baby if you didn't want to. But abortion is harder on the body, especially period abortion, is harder on the body than birth control because you have to be pregnant and pregnancy is harder on the body. And period birth control was also period abortion was also just hard on the body because we didn't have reliable abortion methods in 1789. So that also influenced female mortality.
Also, even more recently, because my dad passed away 10 years ago. When he was growing up, he had 8 brothers and sisters, like 4 brothers and 3 sisters, and 8. That's just what I know that survived the 8.
Yeah,
and that's like in the 1930s. So even then, people had big families.
My mother's mother was one of like 5 or 6, I think. And it almost certainly would have been more if her mother hadn't died, probably of getting the wrong Rh blood after childbirth. So my great-grandmother in the 1920s died of complications of childbirth. And that is going to have an influence on life expectancy. Up until recently, life expectancy through pregnancy and childbirth was much, much higher than it was until in 1789. And that does influence the life expectancy of the average person. But, if you lived to 5, you were almost certainly going to live to 25. It's not like these were old people. Now, they had more lived experience in a lot of ways than the average 25-year-old today, because the average 25-year-old today has not been sent to an apprenticeship at the age of 14 and been basically an indentured servant. They haven't been working on a farm doing hard labor since they were physically able to do so. There's a lot of differences between 25 today and 25 in 1789. We've kind of invented the concepts of childhood and teenage in the intervening centuries.
I don't know if they knew it back then. I think they did. But today, they claim that your brain isn't fully developed until you're 25.
Yeah, your brain is not fully developed until 25. They didn't know that then because we just didn't know as much about the brain as we do now. So I think 25 is an absolute minimum age because it's going to decrease the risk. It's going to increase the risk aversion. You are a lot more likely to take risks under 25 than you are 25 and up. And you have voted a few times theoretically you've been living on your own. At the very least, you've probably been to college. You've maybe been in the military. You've gained a little bit of knowledge about how the world works in theory. And you are able to make decisions from a more adult perspective. And this is said with all the love in my heart for my children. My children do not know how the world works. They don't have to. They're 7 and 11, the children I'm raising. My firstborn, who is 28 as of Tuesday, happy birthday. Sadly, we did not give him the functioning democracy I was hoping to give him for his birthday, but he is, old enough now to be out in the world, to understand how things work, and to theoretically be able to think of people who are not himself and make decisions based on that. And that's why I don't mind that 25 is the age for being a representative.
I just realized this looking at looking at this page that it says 7 years, so 25. That's 18. So 7 years from when you can start voting.
Yeah, you couldn't vote at 18 in those days, but at age 25 now, you've been a citizen long enough. The whole time you've been old enough to vote, you've been a citizen. And I think that's a good, requirement there. You don't have to be a citizen or have to be a born citizen in order to serve in Congress. And I do like that. I do think that's important. I think it's very important that we have some immigrants in Congress to give that perspective.
Yeah. Unless they get deported in a few years.
Yeah, well, Ted Cruz is from Canada, so, well, he was born in Canada, but he was born a citizen, so,
Like, sorry, we're deporting you because you're an immigrant. That's off topic here, but all right. Anything else you want to say about this article? Or this,
nope.
This clade or whatever it's called, paragraph section. All right. When we return, we'll talk about one of the more decisive, not decisive, what's the word? Evil compromises? Whatever the word. Can't think of a good word. But you know what we're talking about when we return.
Notorious.
Oh, notorious. That's a good word.